5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 17. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. The podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss, and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Let's be real, employee disengagement is a big issue. Only 30% of employees worldwide feel engaged at work, and 20% declare they just don't give a crap about their work. The other 50% are in the twilight zone of engagement, not fully engaged, not completely switched off either. There's not much company can do with the 20% paycheck suckers who just show up at work because they have to in order to collect their dues. Instead, companies should focus on the 50% of employees semi-engaged. That's where companies can make a difference and impact their bottom line. Here, our guests share with you how we can make it happen together. Today's guest is Lindsay Boccardo, a nationally recognized millennial expert, coach, and speaker who works with companies across the country on how to embrace Generation Y. Today, we will talk about what the hype and misconception around millennials is, how they're disrupting the workplace and how companies can adapt, what the 4 factors for millennials engagements are, and how organizations must rethink their talent acquisition practices. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. For more information, visit fusionalliance.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast and you will find us there. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at ex_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Lindsay Boccardo, a nationally recognized millennial expert, coach and speaker who works with companies across the country on how to embrace the Generation Y. Lindsay, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome, I'm excited to be here.
Tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, so when I started my company, I basically took this concept of developing young leaders from coaching material. So instead of kind of principle books or here's the 5 principles you need to learn, I wanted to walk young bloods, people who were just new to the job market, through leadership training from a coaching perspective. And there wasn't a lot of people doing it at the time. I was kind of a lone ranger a bit, kind of testing this market. And so I built a program called 7 Steps to Unleash Your Career. And I tried it out on clients all over Indianapolis and then in the nation as well over the phone. And I found that it was really effective in helping them grow and get higher up in their company, become leaders, and ultimately make more money and be more successful. So as I did that for several years, we started to see this pattern and we thought, I bet if I could get in front of CEOs, HR directors, people that are working with them directly all the time, we can make an impact there as well and help them kind of understand the mentality of a millennial and what they're looking for in a job, and then how they can come around them and coach them in such a way that they'll get better performance out of them. So then I created this second part of my company where we actually go into organizations and do keynote talks, we do training, we do workshops to help people who are in leadership over millennials kind of understand where some of their frustration's coming from and then what they can do about it.
What type of size of companies do you work with?
So typically, because I'm a one-man show, I usually stay in the smaller size companies, but I do a lot of keynotes to larger companies where I'm basically saying, here's a bunch of information and data that you can use inside of your organization, but you need a bigger team than just me to make a huge change.
There's been a sort of millennial bashing the past few years, from being lazy to lacking of communication skills to, not being enough confidence or being a bit disruptive, and probably due to all those changes have been due to technology, and there's a perception that they're entitled, and to me, I feel like the anti-millennial population actually feels threatened by change.
Yes.
And the Gen Y is sort of the scapegoat towards that change more than truly a negative feeling about the millennial. What's your take on this?
This is why we're hanging out today, right? Because this is the core of the conversation. I think there are changes that are happening in our culture, in American culture, but worldwide as well. There are changes that are trending, and technology is a big part of that. And the crazy thing about technology, I know you've heard me say this, is it increases communication speed. And the faster that communication speed accelerates, the faster culture changes. And so we're in this season where culture is changing quickly on a global level. And that does change the culture of the workplace as well. It's not immune to that. And so is it really about the millennial? And remember, the millennials aren't the ones that designed the smartphones. They're not the ones that have created the tech. They're just utilizing it.
Right.
So is it really the millennials issue, or is it technology, changing culture, globalism? Are these the things that are really shifting? And of course, we look like the symbol of all that change because we're the ones that are making people uncomfortable. It's global though, and it's a trend. So it's not really about this population. And the two things that I always talk about is older generations always look at younger generations with a long eye. They're not sure about them. I gotta be honest, I'm 32, and when I see 20-year-olds, I have the same thing. I'm thinking, you have no idea what work is yet, right? You're naive, you don't know what you're getting into, and I make those judgments on younger generations. So you can only imagine if you've been doing work a certain way for 35, 40 years, and then you've got these young bloods coming in and want to do it totally different, that's really frustrating. And so I do think the bigger picture is just change across the board, cultural change at work, which you're all about. That change is going to happen, and we are, because we're such a large generation, we are going to usher in that change just by sheer number.
Is there a realization for companies to bring people like you internally to train on how to coexist with different generations? Is there a real, I guess there's a real demand for it, but is what are the type of companies that actually bring someone like you to train and talk about the coexistence of different generations?
Yeah, so I see two different types. Some of them are really large and they keep great data on what's going on in their organization. And they're more traditional fields, banking, insurance, things like that can't go away because we would all collapse, right? But they're seeing the people that have been here that have stuck it out for 35, 40 years now are seriously going to retire. And the Gen Xers, typically inside an organization and on a national scale, there's not as many Gen Xers to fill all those leadership spots that baby boomers created and have lived in. And so then you've got this group of millennials that are coming in that are way bigger than the Gen Xers, and some of them are going to have to be leaders to just sustain what you're doing right now as an organization. So sometimes those big companies with tons of employees come to me and ask, can you please come and talk to our, one time I was in a room with 75 VPs who were all spread over the nation who came together for this national conference. So sometimes I'm in a room like that where I'm speaking to the leaders and they're ready to make some shifts on how they interact with younger employees. The other side, though, where I get to really make a difference beyond just a keynote is in smaller companies, usually 100 or less, where they're hiring, especially in Indianapolis, we've got some great tech and marketing companies that are evolving here and doing some great work, and they're hiring millennials saying, we can't afford, no one can afford the turnover that's happening. We certainly can't and don't want to, so how do we hold on to these? And then I get to actually get my hands in there and talk to people in HR and people who are in training, if they have that, to help develop a career development track that will keep millennials engaged.
There are many stereotypes about the Gen Y
Yes.
population. What are the main attributes of the millennials?
So the negative stereotypes?
Well,
Or
let's talk
just-
about the negative stereotypes and then see
Okay.
what are the true attributes of
Okay.
the Gen Y.
Yeah, so usually what we hear, and you mentioned it to your point earlier, they have poor in-person communication skills, they're narcissistic, self-focused, aren't really able to work like generations past. So those are the ones that I hear most often. And their faces are in their phones, right? So here's the truth. I'm going to, in reverse order, our faces are in our phones because we grew up with them and they're like a second organ. It's just part of our lifestyle. And so I tell organizations, if there's a time when you don't want us on your phone, you're going to have to say that explicitly. Because it's like saying, don't come to work with your left hand. Okay, well, you would have to tell me that. Otherwise, I'm assuming I'm taking it all with me. And so that's a big one that I see oftentimes causes a ton of frustration is expectation around specifically cell phone use. So that one, I think there is a truth to, but there's an easy way to start engaging and fixing that is being very explicit about expectations around that. So I tell managers, whenever you get that twinge of irritation and you're feeling disrespected, instead of judging that person, take a minute and ask, what haven't I communicated? And ask yourself that question as a leader, because I bet you $100 that you're going to see, I actually never said not to bring your phone to this meeting. I just assumed they would know better, right? So that's one. Narcissistic, this idea that we're very self-focused, there's evidence on either side that that's happening. And what I see ultimately from a developmental perspective is when you were growing up in the 80s and 90s, there were a ton of federal programs, there were family changes, shifts happening that put more attention on children. So federal programs, safety, seatbelt laws, helmet laws. We spent a lot of energy and time making sure that the kids were safe in the 80s and 90s. Parents also changed the way that they do parenting, and guess what? Every generation switches the way they do it. Everybody says, I'm going to do it different or better than my parents, right? So that's what we saw, is that parents started to say, hey, this whole authoritarian thing where you do what I tell you to because I said so, we didn't like that grown up. So we're going to make family decisions, voting. We're going to make sure everybody's taken into account. We're going to make this a team effort. And so you take some of these different expectations that you have growing up that you've been taken care of, not just by your family, but by the government and by, your teachers. Everybody's looking out for you. On top of parenting styles, you bring that person into the workforce, and it just makes sense that they expect what? To be taken care of, right? To have a voice, to be seen and heard, for there not to be a really stiff hierarchy in the workforce. So in terms of laziness, that's the way that millennials would say it, is that we're more efficient. We're more efficient. We use technology to solve problems that our parents didn't have or didn't know how to use. So again, laziness is a difficult one to say. First of all, is that developmental? You haven't been in the workforce, so you don't know what it's like. This is your first experience. Is it that we're more efficient? We use technology. I use the example oftentimes that if a millennial has a great idea and they need funding for it, say we want to open a coffee shop, brick and mortar. We want to do the real deal, but we're going to need how much of a loan? Maybe $500,000 loan to get this place built out. In the old days, I would come up with a whole game plan, a strategy, a business plan that I'd present to a banker to get a small business loan. Yeah. Much more strategic thinking, much more, if you think about setting a goal on the small level or a business plan on the big level, you have to have a sequence of events that you know are going to happen and what time they're going to happen at and all that. Millennials don't solve problems that way. They solve problems by collaborating. So if I want to open a brick and mortar coffee shop, I can just go on all the different various fundraising websites, cast an idea out to people, sell them their first cup of coffee before they ever come, right? Or just sell them on the idea and a t-shirt. Yeah. And now I have funding. I may not have a business plan at all, but collaboration is how I got what I needed instead of strategic planning. And so that's another thing when we say lazy. My pushback is I think they're uninformed, and you're asking them to do something that they were never trained in high school, college, by their parents.
It's a different thought process, I would say.
Exactly. Right. It's a different thought process. Great way to say it.
So let's focus on the positive side. What are the positive attributes of millennials?
Yeah. One, they are the highest educated generation in U.S. history. So are they, this is where I go back to the lazy thing. Are they really lazy? Because they spent more time in school and spent more money to be there. And so you think about, what does it take for somebody to stay in school and keep working harder? There is some grit, there is some determination there is a desire to learn and be better and grow. I see that regularly. Another thing that we see is that millennials are much more comfortable with cultural diversity in every way that you can imagine, from racial diversity to LGBTQ rights, all of that. They're much more open and comfortable with different lifestyles, and they live in a much more blended global world, so they're aware of what life is like for people all over the world. Another thing that I see, obviously, is technology. When you grow up with technology, scary as it is, your brain forms different pathways to use it, right? So you grow up with it. So I see this regularly where, and I had a manager tell me this once, of an architecture firm. He said, we were on a call with the client, millennials on the call too. The client requested some data from us that we had not organized yet. And on the call, my millennial staff was able to punch the numbers, get it in a form, and get it to them on the call. You can imagine that manager never thought that would have been possible. Under his own knowledge, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So awareness of how to utilize technology to save time is huge. Those are some of the things that I see, and especially with communication. I can see where people would say they're not the best in-person communicators. I don't know many 20-year-olds who are very well-spoken. I mean, ever. That's not a thing that we train in, again, in our school system. I do see that millennials care about strategic communication to the right people, right? And they're able to direct and get what their needs met through technology and social media communication in a way that no other generation has. So I've seen a millennial has said to me before, my boss doesn't think I'm a good communicator, but I also can get a ton of traction on Instagram for our product.
Yeah.
So do you care that I can't talk to you in person, or do you want me to multiply my efforts times thousands and get this in front of the right people because I understand hashtags and I understand the Instagram game?
So millennials thrive on experiences, right? Whether it's consumer customer experiences, employee experiences.
Yeah.
How do they disrupt the workplace nowadays?
Okay, there's a lot that we can talk about there. One thing that I see is that they're not motivated by money. And there's an argument that no one is actually motivated by money intrinsically. It's an extrinsic motivation. But we see that even millennial salespeople, they don't care if they make $1 million. They just want to make enough to live and then have their freedom back so they can go, have an amazing experience, right? So even when we look down to how we motivate millennials, it's going to have to look different than generations past. Although, when older generations hear what I'm saying to do with millennials, they say, hey, I want that too. I want to do that. You want to send me on a vacation as a bonus? Sure, I'll take that. You want to give me Fridays off if I get my work done? I'll take that. Anybody would want those things. It's just our generation is really pushing it. So that's a big one, is how you motivate and keep millennials in the workplace. There's some significant differences there. But I suspect that what they actually want is just more human than what other generations have allowed themselves to even ask for.
So what do you mean by more human?
Yeah. So humans, we think, based on psych research, is that they are truly best motivated when it's intrinsic, when it's things that they would naturally want anyways. So there's different ways that people have categorized this and studied it, but things like autonomy, right? I want to have some say over what I'm doing and what it looks like. Most humans actually want that on some level. And in the past, if we were to rewind like 70 years, when companies, even the word company is a military term, so you're thinking in the military, you don't get autonomy. You have to conform to stay alive, right? So you have baby boomers who have built companies with a militaristic mentality. They're using military terms to build it. And when you fast forward now to today, just telling somebody to do it isn't going to work. And it's really not how humans work best. So that's what we're seeing. Companies that are on the other end of the spectrum that are really creative and innovative give their employees plenty of time for autonomy and creativity.
Do you feel that millennials have new needs or aspirations, or is it more that they're just more vocal about it? And then basically across generations you see a pattern around needs, aspirations, motivations. It's just that the past generations were not as vocal as the millennials.
That's a good question. Yeah, there's probably a couple pieces to that. So if you don't know what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, and you're not driving a car right now, search really quick Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because this is where this comes into play. When you look at American history, there was a time when security and safety was the main thing that mattered. If you had security and you had food on the table, you were able to feed your family and take care of them, you were winning. You were doing great. My grandfather, I just sat down with him the other day, he's 92 years old, and he was sharing about, I would take a job because it would make money. And when my grandma was alive, whatever we didn't eat, even if it was like 2 bites of the bread, she would keep it, right? So she grew up in a time when safety and security meant success. And now you have, in the 80s and 90s, we were pretty stable as an economy. We were growing. And so you've got these kids who've grown up in only knowing safety and security. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that their human curiosity is naturally going to make them reach for the next level up, right? And so the next level up is love and belonging. So that's what I love talking to companies about too, is how do we create love and belonging here? Because those are very human, but don't sound very professional, do they?
Yeah.
So that's what I love pushing people on when I had the opportunity to talk to them.
When you work with companies, having a purpose in life and at work is very important for millennials.
Oh, yes.
When you work with companies, many companies have already a mission statement, a vision statement. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily lived in a day-to-day basis inside the company. So how do you work with those companies to make it live?
Yeah,
or alive.
I think the first thing, and this is where I usually pull in people who have HR specialties, like Jenny Banner, because she can help me do this type of work. But one of the things that we start with is usually a cultural audit. So it's going through and saying, okay, this is what you say you are. We're going to go ask your employees what they actually experience when they're here to see if they're the same. Because a lot of companies, and I've seen this, I've been in the nonprofit organization world, I was there for about 6 years, will say, everybody repeat the values, everybody repeat. And we're like robots repeating
It's very military too. Right?
Yeah, but nobody's actually doing it, right? And so it really starts with a company audit. And I think it doesn't have to be me, but I think having a third party do some cultural auditing of your company is really helpful to see, is this panning out? We want to say that one of our main values is grit, but how is that really playing out? How are we measuring it? And do we know that in every activity we're infusing that into what we do? So I think that's the first step, is auditing, and then we can come up with a strategic plan to figure out how to embed that into your culture. And there's a lot of layers to that, right? There's individual coaching, there's group coaching, there's helping individuals align and then helping the bigger picture align, and then picking strategic people who are influential all over the org chart, who just have natural influence in the organization to help get them aligned too to these new ideas.
Yeah. So what organizations must do to have boomers, Gen Y, and Gen X cohabitate in harmony?
Yeah, I think the first step, and this is what I do whenever I'm speaking, is bring understanding that we literally grew up in very, very different times with different needs, with different experiences. That's why generational research exists. It's to help you see that, hey, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you had a totally different experience than my grandparents, who grew up at a totally different age, with different things that matter, different ways of communication, all of that. And so the first step is making sure that everyone understands the why. If we don't understand why we're different and what that means, you can't really implement much at all. It's like it's like pushing somebody in the dirt who's got their heels dug in. The harmony starts with understanding. And then different organizations have a different blend of boomers, Gen Xers, and Gen Y, or millennials, right? And so it depends on that organization what we can do to blend them back together. The irony is that most boomers have kids who are millennials, and so there's some really interesting ties there. Gee, you're so irritated, but who created these little monsters? Oh, you did. Let's talk about that. But really, it depends on the blend inside of the organization, how we can go about creating more harmony beyond just understanding.
So what are the main challenges that the companies face when they try to blend and create that collaboration between different generations?
So one of the big ones is work expectations and communication styles. So you'll see, I'll give you an example. baby boomers and Gen Xers, they live, Gen Xers were trained by baby boomers how to act and work, and so they both live under the expectation that no news is good news, that if you don't get feedback but you're getting your paycheck, you're doing great. Millennials, the paycheck is just one element, right? They want consistent feedback at least once a month, at least. And so you have these expectations where if you put a millennial on a team with a baby boomer and the baby boomer's leading the team, that baby boomer needs some education around how to work and give feedback in little bite-sized pieces to a millennial instead of a big dump 12 months later. But the same goes for the millennial as well. They have to understand you're stepping into a new environment and people have had way different experiences than you've ever had too. So know that. I had a client one time I had to talk off the ledge. She hadn't gotten feedback in 6 weeks and she's like, they must hate me, I'm gonna quit. I was blown out of my mind. My mind was totally blown that this was such a struggle for her, but it really is bringing expectations to the table and helping both generations see that they have to grow towards the center here to make this work. And oftentimes, people say, Lindsay, all you do is talk about how organizations need to bend to millennials. What about the other way? What about millennials maturing and understanding that they're coming into something that was here way before they existed? And I do think that's 50% of it. We do have to train them and move them into leadership positions, and it's going to take energy and time and resources to equip them in a way that makes them most efficient.
You talk about the 4 factors of millennial engagement. Can you expand on each?
Yeah, absolutely. So these 4 factors come from me researching other larger bodies of research and finding the patterns, right? Because we don't have time to read 20 blogs every day. So what is the core of, what are we really talking about? We talk about adapting a workplace for the next generation. The 4 that come to the surface every time, and when you read a blog, you'll see these come out. It's purpose and work, influential relationships, personal development, and whole life understanding. So we can just start purpose and work.
Sure.
That's about both understanding how your role in the company affects the outcome, which isn't always done well, and then understanding how this company influences everyone around it, both in, sure, making money is a great bottom line, but another bottom line that matters to millennials is making a difference altruistically in the world. And so we use the classic example everybody knows is Tom's shoes, right? They both make money, and every pair that you buy, somebody gets a pair of shoes in another country that would normally not have them. That's a great purpose concept that millennials are going to continue to flood to, this idea that we're not just here to make money, we're here to impact our neighbors and make a difference. And so when you think of purpose and work, if that's not clear, both their individual purpose and their role and then the purpose of the organization inside of the global economy in a not just financial way, but in helping your neighbor way, they're going to have a challenge of staying engaged because they want that. I had a client one time who was going to get a $10,000 raise as an accountant if they moved to a company that biologically engineered seeds. This person only ate food. What am I trying to say? They only eat not gluten-free food.
Organic,
thank you. Brain stump, yeah. They only eat organic food. So you can imagine they go to this company, they realize they're manipulating the genetic code of seeds. They don't care about the $10,000 raise. They're not going to take the job. That's an idea. That kind of gives you the big picture of purpose and work. Influential relationships. So friendships are the number 1 retention factor. People don't quit on their friends. They quit on their bosses. They don't quit on people they feel connected to in a meaningful way. So influential relationships is both their social life, there needs to be a social element at work where they feel really truly connected on a human level with other people they work with, but then also millennials are looking for mentors and they want managers in their life to coach them through problems, not just tell them what to do. So they see that the people they surround themselves by are actually going to influence their well-being, both on the career side and the personal side, and that's going to play a role in keeping them. It's kind of simple. Now, personal development is my jam. Personal development is this idea that once a millennial feels like they've lost momentum, they're going to start to withdraw. Or they're going to fight and say, I need something more, I need something else to do. And if you think about when you go to college, everything is paced out for you in pretty short terms. In a semester, well, semesters maybe like 3.5, 4 months. And in that time, you may move dorms, you'll have totally different teachers, you'll have a totally different schedule. The pace that they live at is almost like quarterly in a sense, or if you broke the year into thirds, they expect big changes in their lifestyle every, 4 months, 3 to 4 months. Well, you put that person in any organization, and they're going to be shocked at how slow everything moves. And so personal development is really important because it's usually interpreted as I'm losing my momentum, things aren't changing enough, this isn't exciting enough, and that's when they start to withdraw and they lose satisfaction in the job. So it's really important that organizations have a way to co-create a career development plan. Co-create. So if you're telling your millennials, here's the goals we have for you, and they're only having to receive them and do them, that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. That goes back to influential relationships too. I want my boss to sit down with me and co-create where I'm headed. That's exciting because now I know that you believe in me and you're going to help me make it happen. And so personal development is a really important thing. This is the reason that most of my clients come to me and pay as much as they do in rent to work with me. It's not, they're really investing in their own personal development because they're antsy and they're not feeling like they're able to grow in their role. And so this one is really important. And if you're in HR or you're working with talent development, having a career pathing game plan for each employee that they have helped co-create is critical. And then whole life understanding. You remember work-life balance, right? That was like the traditional idea, 9 to 5. From 9 to 5, I own you. I own you, you do the work, and then you can go home and do what you want. That doesn't exist anymore. Whole life understanding is, hey, I'm hiring you because we're going to team up and create something really amazing here. Totally different mentality from the start. I don't own you. We work together. We're colleagues. And together we're going to create something. That also means that I take into account your stress levels, your physical health, your needs, your schedule. I had an intern this summer. She would send me things at 2 a.m. And I don't care if she got it done in time. Why does it matter if she does it at 5 p.m, or 4 p.m, or 2 a.m.? It doesn't matter to me. So whole life understanding is this idea that I don't actually own anybody. People come when they're inspired to come, and they stay when they're inspired to stay. And I need to engage them in a way that's humane, that understands them as a whole person, a whole being. They're much more likely to engage and stay when they feel like they're taken care of and not just used at work.
So flexibility at work, employee empowerment, those are not new terms. So why do we put much more focus now than we did, let's say, 5, maybe 10 years ago?
Sure. I think some of it is we are able to be more flexible than ever before.
Technology.
I mean, you and I, we came in today, right? You pulled everything out of your bag, and we set it up, and we made it happen. Technology is incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So what I love is this idea that whenever you're at a job, think about how can we be using technology to make this job more flexible? Do I actually have to sit at this desk with this computer for 9 hours? And is it the most effective way? Do you get the best work out of me then? I don't think that you do for a typical human. And so when we talk about flexibility, I encourage leaders to ask their staff, how would you like flexibility? Because some jobs, let's take an ER nurse. You don't get to work from home.
Right.
You can't do stitches from your couch. Yeah. So an ER nurse, some hospitals have come to me and I say, ask your employees what type of flexibility they want. Maybe they want different length of shifts. Maybe they want to be able to say, hey, on some of these days I'd rather work in this area, and other days I'd rather work in this area. Even jobs that are seasonal, we see if you can give your employees some flexibility either where they are, say an amusement park, right? If they have some flexibility of saying where they work when, and have a little bit more autonomy in the sense that they can choose some more of this besides just being told what to do, they're going to engage more. So flexibility, I think, is just becoming bigger because technologically speaking, we're able to do more. So millennials who grew up with it say, why not? Why not let me work at Starbucks? What's the difference?
Yeah, just listening to what you're saying, and we've been talking about communication for quite some time already. I think the big key is communication in the past was probably seen as a one-way communication from the top to the bottom.
Yes.
And now it's more of a two-way communication, but also that millennials really want to be listened to.
Yes.
right? Not and probably even more than Gen Xers or Boomers.
They
And I
at
think
least
that's what
expect to be.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really where I would say maybe some companies struggle. It's to
Yes.
be able to pay attention and listen, to not just hear but listen to and respond accordingly.
Yep.
Right.
That's a great point.
I've heard many times. Actually, I had a CEO of a company that I worked for before said, "Oh yeah, I hear you," meaning I don't give a shit about what you say. I just hear that you bubble, right?
Your words are going in my ears.
Exactly. So there's a difference between hearing and listening to.
Yes, absolutely. It takes a lot more intention to listen, because I think there's an implication when you're listening that you're actually going to respond
Yeah.
meaningfully.
Active listening.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to respond in the moment, and I'm going to take action. I'm going to do something different. If you're in, let's take it, if you're in a relationship, if you've got a friend that says, I hear you, but they don't actually change their behavior in a simple way, even in a friendship, you'd say that person isn't really interested.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing inside of the corporate setting. If you think about, there's a blur line that's happening, and I think you've talked about this, I know Jenny Banner's talked about this too, between the customer experience and the employee experience.
Yes.
The more that those line up and are the same, the more successful you're going to be, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of the big, I'm doing a huge flyover, but that's kind of the big idea. So you can imagine when you buy a product, you expect that there's a responsiveness there if something goes wrong, right? I bought a piece of furniture, it came to my house, it had gotten broken when it was being shipped. I expected that there was going to be a quick response and a fix to the problem. If there wasn't, I would have gone on social media and talked about it. But then, inside of the employee experience, we don't always see that same amount of responsiveness. So then you're expecting employees who aren't getting that type of responsiveness to go out into the world and treat clients with that type of responsiveness. It makes no sense. So that's where I think we're seeing those lines blur, and hopefully organizations will see that it really does affect the bottom line when you listen and when you respond in a meaningful way to your employees. It sends a huge ripple effect to your bottom line.
What's the ratio of Boomers versus Gen Xers and Gen Y in the workforce right now?
Yeah, so that, it depends on the research that you're looking at, but in 2015, millennials hit 45% of the workforce, and they were projected, they're now the majority of the workforce. We'd have to look for 2017. I don't have those off the top of my head, but in the past it's been 21% Gen Xers, and then the remainder is baby boomers. Baby boomers, though, are retiring at a faster rate than we expected. So I suspect if you were to look at statistics at the beginning of 2017 versus the end, they would be more dramatic than years past.
Yeah. So what's the impact of everything that we've talked about from a talent acquisition and recruiting perspective for companies? How do they have to switch the way they think and they operate when they try to attract top talents, top Gen Y talents? Because obviously the talent market is super competitive, right? And the companies just can't. They're no longer in a position of strength where people really want to come work for them.
Totally.
Companies have to fight to get the best talents.
Totally.
So how does it change things around when it comes to talent acquisition and recruiting?
Yeah, you make a really good point that, and this is true of millennials, if they're not interested in the job, they don't want it, they can go build their own Etsy shop. They can sell stuff online on eBay. They'll make an Amazon shop. Like, they don't necessarily need an outlet for work like they have in past generations. So I would say when you're recruiting, looking at first if these four factors, purpose and work, influential relationships, personal development, and whole life understanding, those have to exist in your organization before you can tell somebody that they do, right? And so in a sense, it's making sure, doing that cultural audit to see where you're at with those four before, while you recruit, those things probably happen simultaneously in most situations. So continuing to make your culture stronger in those areas will make recruiting easier. I see my clients go in for interviews now, and they're not asking like, okay, how much am I going to get paid? That's not what they're doing. They're going, okay, I want to see how this boss talks to these employees. I want to see if I would fit into the team. I want to feel it out. And so there's a lot more need for strong culture. Money is not going to be the only factor that's going to make a talented person come to you. So when we think about recruiting, again, the inside has to match the outside. The actual experience of current employees has to match what people are getting when you're telling them about opportunities. In recruiting too, when you can inject these ideas that there's a purpose in this work in this organization that's bigger than the bottom line, we do create opportunities for you to grow, and we want you to have a development plan. Anybody who's high potential, they're going to be looking for that, and they're going to find comfort in knowing that you consider their personal growth a top priority. And then that whole life understanding, you're not competing against the company that pays the most. You're competing against the companies that are most empathic and understand humans, and they're not necessarily the biggest, companies, even in Indianapolis. They're the ones that understand how to treat people the best. And that's what millennials are going to be looking for.
And I think the key word here is empathy. We talked about active listening,
yes.
right? Communication, but it's really the key. It's empathy. It's to be able to empathize with, and in both ways, right? From the manager
100%.
perspective and the employee perspective as well. So we're getting close to the end, but at this point in time, typically I like to ask our guests some more personal questions so that our listeners get to know you a bit more personally. So the first question would be, if you were to invite a historical figure to dinner, who would that be and why?
Oh, that's such a good question. I maybe it's because I live in the Midwest, but I'm really interested in Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
I feel like everyone's gonna be like, yeah, of course you said Abraham Lincoln. But I would like to have a conversation with him and understand his leadership mentality. He had to deal with major national issues and find a way to be victorious and bring freedom to more people. And yet he also had his own backstory that some of us know more about than others. But I would like to just sit down and understand what it's like to be a leader with that much pressure on your shoulders to create what you dream of. Martin Luther King Jr. comes to mind too. I mean, such a powerful communicator, changed perspectives with just stories. That's how good he was. I mean, he created a lot in his time, and I think it's always interesting when somebody is loved so much and is making such a difference and they're killed by their, by other humans. That's kind of dark and weird for me to share, but I think it's really interesting to meet leaders that are that dynamic.
Okay. What's the essential item you always take with you when you go on vacation?
Books.
Books?
It's bad. It's
and
bad.
real books, not iBooks. Real books?
Here's the dealio. What I do is I do take like one or two paper books, because if you're out, I don't always want to have my electronic devices on me. But then I have so many books. I love Amazon and I love Kindle books. It is so dangerous to be able to buy a book at the touch of your fingertips whenever you want, right? So, yeah, I always have books on me. It would make me nervous to fly without some type of reading material.
What do you like to read then?
I read a lot of books about psychology, spiritual formation. Sure, definitely how to build and lead people well, how to build into them. But a lot of what I do on my free time is more in the psychology realm, neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, and then the soul side of a human as well, the spiritual side.
Okay. Well, the next question should be an easy one for you. What excites you the most when you go to work?
Oh my gosh. I've got the best clients in the world. I feel spoiled. So when I go to work, I wake up knowing people's lives are going to be transformed because they're willing to make the changes and have really difficult conversations with me. And so I get excited about knowing that at the end of the day, somebody's going to be inspired, more hopeful, and more focused on their mission. That's what gets me out of bed.
And finally, what's your favorite food?
Oh, my only one favorite food?
If you were to pick one.
If I had to pick one, pizza. I'm Italian, Boccardo is my last name. Anything with, garlic, basil, tomatoes, I'm in.
What type of crust?
Well, I have to eat gluten-free, so it's always a gluten-free crust. Which
Thin crust?
Thin. Yeah, it's thin, and some of them are great, and some of them are cardboard. But yeah, that'd be my favorite.
So for our listeners who want to follow you, what's the best way to do that on social media?
Yeah, I still love Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, you can find me at Lindsay Boccardo. I've got a Facebook page, certainly you can do that. And my website is just my name, lindsayboccardo.com. You can find all the information there as well.
All right, so if you guys have more questions about millennials, reach out to Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
It was fun. Thanks, Lindsay.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.